Hello, all, and welcome back to another episode of Movies and Us, a weekly gathering place filled with conversations about movies, stories, and connection. My name is Jennifer Hahn.
And I'm Sarah Callan.
And today we're going to review the latest film, Monkey Man. Sarah, kick us off with an IMDb summary for Monkey Man.
An anonymous young man unleashes a campaign of violence against the corrupt leaders who murdered his mother and continue to systemically. I'm so sorry. I can't read today. Shall we try that again?
Take two.
I swear, sometimes I'm like, that's not what that word is. Hold on. Jesus. Okay, we're going to give it another whirl. An anonymous young man unleashes a campaign of violence against the corrupt leaders who murdered his mother and continue to systemically victimize the poor and powerless.
What even is the difference between systemically and systematically? You know, like the English language is just a whole hot mess. Very confusing.
You know, we like to add additional letters and syllables into things sometimes just for funsies.
Yes, just to keep you on your toes. What is
Yeah.
the difference? I don't really know. There's probably some
I don't know.
nuanced something or
Yeah.
other.
Whatever.
Whatever.
Broad strokes, it's the same.
Yes. All right, let's start off with our one-sentence summaries for Monkey Man. I can assure you systemically or systematically is not included in mine.
Nor mine. Mine
There we
are
go.
all much smaller words.
Yes. Okay, what is yours?
Mine is drummers make the best personal trainers.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I love it. I love it. I mean, the workout classes that I do, they blast the music very loudly, and I can attest that it does make me run faster than I would in total silence. So, a great beat, man. Really gets you going. So, I can relate. Nice. My one sentence summary is like Bobby's gun of choice, a monkey man is smart and effective.
Nice. Yes, indeed.
Okay, let's dive into our thoughts, our review of the movie Monkey Man. And in this first section, we will not spoil this movie. It is out in theaters. Please check it out before listening to the second part of our conversation so that you don't have this movie spoiled for you. But in this first section, we're going to keep our thoughts at a high level. So, Sarah, I'm intrigued to hear your review of Monkey Man. How did this work for you?
This movie it rocks. It's so good. And honestly, this is Dev Patel's directorial debut.
Right?
And it's so impressive. Like, how did he do this for his first movie that he starred in, produced, co-wrote? Like, what? This is insane. It's so good. The action in this movie is solid. The story is also solid with a character who has emotional depth to him. You know, like, this isn't just a generic action movie, but this is like a deeply personal film that also has some great action in it. And it just has this kinetic, propulsive energy throughout that you're just amped up. Like, I left the theater and I was so amped. I was like, yes, Monkey Man, let's go. This is just an electric movie, and it's so much fun to watch. And it's one of those that I walked out and I was like, man, when can I see this again? I was so ready to experience this all over again because it's so immersive. It's so fun. Can't recommend it enough.
Yes, indeed. And what I love is that Dev Patel clearly, like, this is something that he's passionate about, that he is willing to put the time, money, and attention to bringing this story to the screen. And I mean, from a filmmaking perspective, from an entertainment perspective, it is so much fun, a rocking good time, hits all of those exemplary facets of a great entertaining action movie. Check, 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 check. But I also love that there's so much meaning and purpose and advocacy that's also like woven into this movie that makes it feel really personal and really meaningful as well. I was kind of surprised by all of those aspects of this movie. So this just feels like something that he really felt was important to bring to audiences. And I love that he's unafraid to touch on these bigger topics, bigger subjects, while also not compromising any of those fun entertainment action set pieces that he knows that we as the audience are also there to be thrilled by. So the way that this movie is able to hit on all of those strings and touch all of those chords is really incredible. People are comparing this to John Wick, which I totally see the comparison of, but I think that this in a way does some things that are so different and so much deeper than the John Wick series does. No hate to John Wick. We love John Wick. We love that whole franchise. It is amazing. It is so much fun. But I don't know. This movie feels like it's in a different category to me because of all of those other shades and colors that it's bringing into the storyline in a really fascinating way. And it's incredible that it's his directorial debut. I mean, it's wild to me. He's got such vision and clarity for what he wants to communicate, and I think this is an exciting time where we're seeing like fresh, original ideas, storytelling, filmmaking getting made, and people showing up for it. And I think that we have been in such a like franchise era for so long, and I'm just so thrilled to see pieces like this that are getting funded and made and being brought to the big screen that we get to enjoy. And he's such a clear visioned filmmaker, and he's able to bring something like this to life, which is really thrilling and really exciting. So um, there's some pieces in the story itself that uh like don't totally work for me in the ending. There's some like stuff that gets a little muddled or a little unresolved for me personally, but those are small details. And I think that overall as a whole, this is such a strong film in so many different ways.
Yeah, I read that this was initially supposed to be a Netflix release, and then Jordan Peele saw it and acquired it because he knew that it deserved like a bigger theatrical release.
Yes.
And I'm so glad that he did that because this is a
Mhm.
movie that you want to see in theaters. Like it'll look good and be a good time on your TV at home, but man, the way that this is structured and the way that it's so immersive, the cinematography and the sound really working together to make you feel like you're in the room as this action is happening, like go see this on the biggest
Yes.
screen that you can. Go see it in a theater and also support a movie like this. You know,
Yes. Yes.
it is. I see the comparisons to John Wick, but like you said, there's a lot of deeper things going on in Monkey Man than there was in John Wick. And the action is just as good. It's just in a different style of action, which is
Mhm.
so fun to see after we're so used to like really gun heavy action movies. It's nice to see one that's a lot more creative with the choreography. So yeah, can't recommend this enough. So glad it got a theater release. This is one of those,
Yeah.
I would have been so upset if I had to sit at home and watch this
Yeah.
on Netflix for the first time. So
Mhm.
I'm really glad that Jordan Peele stepped in and it got a theater release because it's absolutely deserving of one.
It warms my little heart so much because it's such a perfect example of the way that like artists can bring up and call into this stage with the influence that they have for the new up and coming emerging artists that they want to elevate. Like, no, we are going to use our resources to fund, support, create opportunities for the art that we believe more people need to see on the stage that it deserves to get seen in. And for Jordan Peele to use his success and his resources to be able to do that for Dev Patel's piece here, and the whole team is a really like beautiful story of just like artists supporting each other and elevating each other's work. It's so cool. It's so heartwarming. But I think that you mentioned some really great points about this being so rewarded as a theater experience because, like you mentioned, there's so many choices creatively in the cinematography and in the score that I think are really heightened and are able to be appreciated more fully when it's in a theater. Like even you referenced in your one sentence summary, that whole sequence of him training with the drumming, like that was powerful because you felt it reverberating in your chest as that scene is unfolding. And it could be great at home, but it doesn't hit the same way. Like the intensity of those scenes are just a little bit more muted when it doesn't get that full experience in a theater with those big sound quality, stereo surrounding sound capabilities. It's a little less thrilling than it deserves. So scenes like that, I think about, how that could be so different experientially in a smaller scale versus the larger scale.
And one of my favorite parts of this movie, which is going to be a weird thing to say, but is the sound design. So throughout the film, you have these different types of fights, and they're not using guns, but they're using primarily, I mean, there are some guns, but they're using primarily just any object in the vicinity. So you got like wine bottles, champagne bottles, chair legs, you got a chunky heel at one point. Like you have all of these different implements to use as a weapon, and all of them make different sounds when they're fighting. And there's one fight in particular where everybody uses a different object, as our unnamed protagonist is like making his way through all these bad guys. And I was so impressed at how every fight sounded different. Like not only did it look different because the choreography was really creative and interesting, but it sounded different. So you knew, the slash of a knife sounds different than, a broken bottle of champagne, and then somebody gets like a broken chair leg and it's like this like thumping sound. I was just so
That's so true.
impressed at that in like attention to detail.
That's very true.
And I'm just so glad that I was able to see that and experience that in the theater, because it wouldn't sound as good in my TV at home. So just
Mm.
another to go see it in the theater and just really it heightens that experience, like you are in the room while they're fighting, because it sounds so different and you're hearing the fights happening all around you. It was just so intentionally done. I was blown away by the sound.
That's a really great point, that like experiencing that in the theater really maybe helps you notice those differences in the different thumps or the different pieces of glass that enter into the human flesh and different sounds, all of those little details you get to really experience more fully than maybe just the homegoing viewing experience. And what I also love about those scenes and those action set pieces throughout this film is that they all take on a different tone and a different character, and that the soundtrack and the score that's used to support and kind of underlie those scenes are also very different. So the one that really stood out to me was when Dev Patel's fighting the brothel owner when he's on the run. It's more lighthearted, like in nature, and the score is kind of this more pop sounding soundtrack in like with the traditional Indian music and kind of like a Bollywood, almost like high energy pop, slightly more positive leaning sounding backdrop to that scene. And even the way that they are fighting are a little bit more silly and a little bit more lighthearted, versus when he is fighting Rana or when he is fighting his foes. There is an intensity. I think there's one action sequence in the end where his crew shows up at well, and I think it's like screamo music and this really intense, gritty sound. And I feel like it really made each of those action scenes feel different. And the variation in them throughout this film was kind of a feast for us to experience. Whereas while we're making these comparisons to John Wick tends to be like in the style, in the franchise brand of the way that John Wick fights. And there might be different set pieces. We have horses, we're in a knife shop, but the style and the tone is a little bit more consistent throughout the film. Whereas the variation of styles and moods of the fight sequences, some more silly and lighthearted, some really intense, made this really exciting. It was kind of like a buffet experience. We got to taste and see all of these different ways an action scene can play out, and I think that made it really fun as well.
And that is always the goal of an action movie. You don't want to give away all of your best stuff in the first act, and you also want to make sure that all of your fights are interesting enough to make the audience feel like they haven't seen this before. And Monkey Man is so effective in doing that, just because of all of the things coming together to achieve that. And I think the cinematography is also a huge help in all of that, because we get all sorts of different camera movements, and then the way that those are edited together in different fights all look different as well. And so I think this is just one of those examples where all of these technical components are coming together to keep you interested and keep the action just going. And even though it's not like fighting the entire 2 hour runtime, I think because those fights are so explosive, and like your heart is racing, and you feel like you're just like in the middle of what's going on with Dev Patel's character. So then when those lulls happen, there's still this energy to them, and I think the cinematography really helps with that. And all of these shots and all of these camera movements are so intentionally chosen to get you to where you need to go next. So I'm so impressed with this movie. It just works on so many different levels, which you don't always get with an action movie. I feel like some action movies, it's like, yeah, the fighting was great, but like the other stuff was boring, or like by the third act, you're like, okay, I'm kind of done. But this movie, I don't know, for me, it worked from start to finish. I was engaged the whole time and just rooting for the Monkey Man. Like, let's go. Yes, let's avenge your enemies. Let's get vengeance on them. Yes. It was great.
Yes. And it's something that we often rant about here on the pod, which is like, why can't we have both? Why can't we have like meaningful storytelling paired with really thrilling, well executed action sequences? And the Monkey Man proves that we can. I think it actually heightens the action sequences because we are so invested in our protagonist, in his mission and the stakes of it and the emotions behind it for him. We feel it too. And he's not kind of this like unnamed protagonist that's really great at fighting that we're just seeing go out into all of these different set pieces and do the thing that's cool. No, there really feels like an emotional stake and a meaning behind each sequence where we're like invested in his catharsis for himself, and also we just want to see him win and take out his enemies in this fight. And I think those two things, when they're intertwined together, make the fight sequences extra thrilling, extra exciting. One thing that I really appreciate about these action scenes especially as well is that our main protagonist, Bobby, or he's also called Kid, I suppose, because we don't actually learn his true name, but there is no plot armor. Like, he gets really hurt in some scenes.
Mm-hmm.
He kind of
Yeah.
needs to be trained, and he has a whole sequence where he gets to get trained up, but he's not this like highly effective assassin or this superhero like character, which actually I thought that they were going to kind of take that approach, because the trailer really shows him in those really great well choreographed, elegant, fight scenes. And I'm like, okay, we've got an assassin. No, actually, he's just a normal dude that like knows how to fight a little bit. But for a lot of the movie, he's struggling and figuring out how to survive. And I feel like that was really fun too, because we often see our action protagonists be really effective from the beginning or have a natural talent for it that they just are wielding in all of these fight scenes. But no, he gets really hurt. And then sometimes I'm fearing for him in those scenes, which make them extra heart pumping and extra exciting too. So the lack of plot armor actually really heightens this storytelling and the the action scenes in this movie.
Yes, we love it when our protagonists can get hurt and then they can overcome that. Like I don't I don't know how we got to this point where like our action movie heroes just are invincible superheroes. Like that's boring. Where are the stakes if they can't get hurt? And this character gets hurt. He gets very badly injured at certain points and continues to just push forward. And that makes it so much more interesting. And another thing that I appreciated about this is that in certain fights, I don't think all of them, but in one moment that I'm remembering pretty clearly is he has multiple people fighting him at the same time. Like I feel like in a lot of action movies there will be like a group of goons and there will be one protagonist in the middle, and then all of the goons take their turn in trying to like beat up their protagonist. And I'm like, that doesn't make sense. If there's a bunch of you, attack them all at once. Like that's just a better strategy. And we see that a little bit in this film where you have multiple people coming at him at one time. And I think that also makes things even more exciting, especially because he's not a superhero covered in plot armor and he can get hurt. So just the way that this film is constantly raising the stakes for his physical safety and also has that strong emotional grounding as well just makes it even more thrilling to watch.
Yeah, no, that's so true. And to echo a point that you made earlier, there there's not a lot of guns in this movie, which I was surprised by, honestly. Yeah, like even in the last, big action set sequence, where he goes for vengeance on all of his foes, which I won't spoil too much of because we'll get into that in spoiler territory. But I was expecting him to show up like locked and loaded with all of his gear, but he
Mm-hmm.
doesn't. And I honestly was a
Yeah.
little concerned for him. Like, oh, were you prepared for this? Did we think through this? Because that is maybe the more efficient route, but I love that the film is leaning into our protagonist's creativity and also his skill now that he has been trained in to know to go, no, we're not going to do like the big shootout sequence that, we often get in a lot of modern action movies, but there's a greater level of dedication needed to the choreography that Dev Patel and team have committed to make that final set piece really exciting. And I think it's more thrilling to watch because we don't get just people like hiding behind columns just shooting at each other. No, there's a lot of hand-to-hand combat, which with, like, as you mentioned earlier, lots of creative weapons of choice, whatever you can find. And I think it makes it more exciting. But again, that willingness to commit the time and energy, attention to go above and beyond and to do the harder task, to do the choreography and the blocking of all of that, that this movie is really rewarding the audience experience by choosing to spend that extra time and energy to do it that way instead of just big shootout sequence, people hiding behind objects, and then people maybe getting hurt because they didn't shoot or did shoot, a split second earlier or later. Like, we've seen that a million times, and there's something that's fresh about that action sequence in this movie, that big final action sequence.
Yeah, and I think that's why it sounds so exciting too, because I mean, like in a lot of action movies, you get like the Star Wars like pew pew, or you get like actual gun
It's
sounds,
adorable.
and it's just various booms. It's boring after a while. It's just the same sound ish
Mhm.
over and over and over again. And this is so much more interesting. But I think there's also something to having action movies that aren't centered on America or Americans.
Mm.
I love a good murder mystery. I love a good like cop procedural, especially those that take place in like the UK or other parts of Europe, because you don't have shootouts in those, just
Mhm.
because the access to guns is very different in those countries. And so I don't know what it's like in India. I have not done my research, but I think there is something to watching action movies that are centered around people in a different nation, just because the types of weapons that are available and the types of fighting styles are so different from place to place. And so I'm hoping that we get to see more diverse action stories like this, just because it'll be more exciting and interesting visually, auditorially, just because
Mhm.
of what they have access to.
Yeah, no, that's so true. That's so true. And I think, like we've mentioned in the past, that's the beauty and the power of elevating artists that are from diverse backgrounds and from underrepresented groups and have different lived experiences, is that the the storytelling and the pieces that they create give us insight, perspective, windows into other worlds beyond the ones that we've seen already that have been made, you know, like even like we mentioned earlier, there's so much like meaning and purpose and advocacy that feels so intertwined into the fabric of this movie around classism, poverty, the intertwining of the spiritual, the political, and the corporate, and those, you know, corruptions and power that Dev Patel, our protagonist, he's fighting up against. It's partially like a personal story of him seeking vengeance for his mother, but also it's him and this crew fighting against the larger systems that are established. And that adds emotional stakes to the action sequences, but it also offers uh, our window into a new perspective into other countries and the things that they are facing. And I just think about like how many more audiences might have a better understanding or have curiosity that's been ignited by this movie around what's happening in the government systems beyond the United States, what's happening in India, right? What are the forces at play there? What are the things that that nation is facing that Dev Patel feels passionate about and has interwoven into this movie? That is the beauty and power of really finding all of these diverse stories and getting them made, which, to harken back to a point made earlier, love the way that Jordan Peele and some of these other artists and the way that we use our time and money and influence to make this possible, even honestly, just to get it made is pretty incredible. And the fact that we get to see it and talk about it is just the cherry on top as well.
Yeah, and that's another thing that I love about this film is that it is tied to a place, it is tied to a
Mm,
culture. Um, and I think like right now there's a lot more diversity in film, and I think that that's really important. You know, it doesn't need to always be like this like, you know, steroid induced white dude who is leading an action film, but it can
in a
be
suit,
anybody
always.
really. Yeah. um but I love that this isn't just like a generic action hero and then they just happened to cast an Indian man as the
Mm,
protagonist, but this is tied to India. It is tied to religion. It is tied to their culture and the things that are being faced in that nation. And I think that that is really, really special. And to your point, like the importance of diverse storytellers. It's not just that we need to see diversity represented on screen, but we
mm,
also need to allow people to share deeply personal stories in a way that feels right for them, you know. Like I'm so impressed that this film is, it's great action, we've already talked about that, but then it touches on all of those things that you mentioned and it's
mhm.
accomplishing so much through this action medium. And I think that that is a really, really special thing. And again, what a testament to Dev Patel and the whole team behind this, that they were able to accomplish this really personal story through the vehicle of amazing action.
Mm, yeah, yeah, and is has not compromised on either end, you know, has figured out a way for both of those things to actually fuel each other. The action sequences feel more thrilling, feel more meaningful, because it's girded by these emotional stakes, like the character development and the way that we feel that connection to the character. It's all feeding back and forth into each other, which I think is like the most beautiful thing. Like realistically, they shouldn't be separated from each other, right? And the way that they actually support each other and make the that symbiotic relationship between those action sequences and the storytelling is really, I mean, it shines in this movie. It's a perfect example of the way that works. And it's a similar conversation we had with Godzilla minus one as well. The way that the characters and the story actually make those big sequences when they're fighting Godzilla feel more meaningful versus just pure spectacle entertainment of like, okay, group of people trying to fight the big bad monster. No, there feels like there's so much behind what you're rooting for in those sequences. So yeah, so good.
Oh, so good.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Oh,
It's
man.
amazing.
Monkey Man. Who knew that this was going to be just such a gem? Like, I was excited about it because Dev Patel and Jordan Peele, and I needed to know zero additional information other than that. I was going to go see this movie. But I'm so impressed by it. I do feel similarly to how I felt after Godzilla minus one. I'm like, how
Mm.
is Monkey Man as good as it is? Like,
Mm.
this thing is great.
Yes, yes, indeed, indeed. Okay, let's include a spoiler. If you haven't seen Monkey Man, we've just gushed about it for about a whole half an hour. So please check it out in your biggest theater experience, biggest screen, biggest sound, everything. Go watch it in the movies and fully immerse yourself in it. Like we have mentioned, it is well worth your time and funny to get to see it in that big scale that it deserves. So, okay, we are now going to enter into spoiler territory so we can talk about anything that we want. What are some other things that really stood out to you in this film, and what it is showcasing?
Yeah, I really appreciate how so we talked about it a little bit, but there are so many different themes and concepts that this film really highlights in a strategic way and without trying to be like too preachy about it. I was actually, after I left the theater, I was thinking about Leave the World Behind that we reviewed a few months ago, and that movie tries to, they're very different from each other, but
Uh-huh.
Leave the World Behind tries to tie all of these very diverse concepts together, which are all like tangentially related to each other, and they're all really important things to think about. But Leave the World Behind isn't super effective in landing that point that it's trying to make, I don't think. But Monkey Man, action thriller, revenge flick, manages to do that. And I'm so impressed by that, and the way that it showcases, you know, wealth disparity, and then but it also is talking about, you know, the theft of land and the destruction
Yeah.
of indigenous people's homes and the environment, and, you know, the rights of trans people, and the combining of politics and religion. Like, it's accomplishing a lot
Mm-hmm.
amidst action. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm very, very impressed by that, and love that the movie, it's not just an action movie, but the action is a vehicle to exploring all of these other themes, and highlighting these things without, like we already said, like detracting from the action. And
Mm-hmm.
what an ambitious goal, and even more impressive that they actually pulled it off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there is such a like feast of themes and ideas and aspects of society that are kind of presented in this film. Um, and you honestly could go down any of those rabbit holes. But one thing that I found particularly exciting about this film is the way that those themes then are trickled into these little details that they've chosen for the action sequences. So two of my favorite examples of this. One is the way that Dev Patel's character finally kills Rana Singh, the chief head police, the person that sexually assaults his mother, is taking advantage of Sita, the woman that we see featured throughout the film, they have the shared understanding with, is with the sparkly shoe. And I just feel like that was
Mm-hmm.
such an intentional and symbolic choice to for that to be, again, we've mentioned there's very creative weapons of choice throughout this film, but for that to be the choice, and it is so, it catches the light in all of the best ways, because it is shiny and sparkly, and there's a giant chunky heel on the back of that thing, and that's a perfect example of the way that like he is, it is not an accidental choice, but there is meaning behind that, and the seeds were planted throughout the film of that theme. So when we see that visual of the sparkly shoe worn by a woman who was in this VIP room that was getting taken advantage of, there's meaning and purpose behind that, but it's interwoven into this action set piece, and you can notice some of those little details. The other one that I really loved was when his crew shows up from the temple, the transgender population, and the team that was really supporting him in his training and all of that. When they show up to help, they are dressed in not just random normal clothes, but they are dressed in this
Mm-hmm.
sparkly, shiny ceremonial dress. And it feels like this reclaiming of maybe these spiritual deities that they want to honor and respect, but that have been corrupted and manipulated and used by uh, this political system. They are reclaiming that, and so that's what they show up in that action sequence. You know, they could have shown up in anything, you know, but the attention to detail to say, no, this is their choice, this is what they're representing. I love how those details have so much meaning, and we get to just notice and pick up on those things, and then really get to like soak in those. And just the example, like we were talking about earlier, of the intertwining between the action, the meaning, the storytelling, and the action, they all are funneling and kind of feeding into each other.
And just what a good example of something that is visually interesting. And so if you're not trying to like read any more into the film, it looks visually interesting and it's exciting, and the way that the camera and the lighting are able to utilize both of those devices is pretty fascinating. But then if you want to go deeper, then you can find all of that extra meaning embedded in those objects. And so, once again, just shout out to the writing and the choices that were made in those objects, because it didn't have to be those, but they took the time to add that additional meaning into those things. So if you want to dig, there's plenty for you to find. And then if you just want to watch an action movie and not think about it, then it looks really, really exciting and interesting and creative. So it just works on both of those levels, which is great and is what you want in an action movie.
Yes, that's so true. And you're right, like just visually seeing these people in these like shiny sparkly dresses, and as they're turning and fighting, they like there's some really great like cinematography in that scene too, where they kind of showcase the way that the dress moves and catches the light as it sparkles, but they're like stabbing some dude to the left as they do it, you know, like that was such a contrast to the way that the men that they are fighting are kind of like awkward and clumsy, but there's this elegance into the way that they move and twirl in their dresses as they're taking you out. You know, like that visual spectacle was really fun too. It's something that you don't see often in an action movie. Is these people in this beautiful ceremonial garb fighting in this really elegant way. It was just kind of, I mean, just visually on its surface, really fascinating to watch.
And okay, so it reminded me of a movie that I saw last year that I loved, called Polite
Mm,
Society.
yes.
Um, which is also, it's two Indian women, but they are in London, and there are multiple fight scenes, especially at the end, where they are dressed in these very like ornate dresses, not the same as what they have in here, but they're just so colorful and beautiful, and watching them fight with these like flowing robes and all of this
Yeah.
beautiful fabric is just so fun. And so
Mhm.
I again just love those visuals and how they're not just wearing these robes, these outfits to wear the outfits, but it's deeply tied in with the culture and there's additional meaning to it. That dual purpose, I think, makes it so special. And I don't know, it's just an example of what makes this Monkey Man movie so good is that there's just layers and layers of meaning. If you want to go digging.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. And I think the cinematography and the editing really helps highlight that contrast between the way that they fight and the beauty of it and the elegance of it versus their foes. Just there's some really cool shots edited in there where it's almost this like slow motion of their dresses moving in the light that you kind of are like intoxicated by, like you're just like, wow. And also just like logistically, if you're fighting against someone in this giant sparkly costume, I'm sure it's distracting in a way, like just from a pure logistics perspective of you every little detail when you're fighting someone. I'm sure I've never fought a person, but I could imagine like trying to anticipate when they're throwing a punch at you, when to duck. And logistically, I bet it's harder when there's sparkly, shiny pieces catching the light in every direction around you. Like even the like strategic nature of that is kind of fun to think about as well.
Jen, are you telling me that you're not like moonlighting as a brawler, like just getting into fights with people?
I could be a secret assassin. They always say it's the person you least expect. It's like the random.
Honestly,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The key
honestly.
is that I'm fighting in a sequin dress. So
Of
if you see me
course.
out
Of
there
course.
in a sequin
Yeah.
dress, I'm on the job. I got a mission
Yeah.
to do.
Yeah. And then you know how to like catch the light so you can blind the person
Right.
that you're fighting.
Yes,
Yeah.
this is very key. This
It's
is very
it's a
key.
very like strategic part of training that you have to go
Yes.
through and how to
Yes.
blind people with your dress when you're fighting them.
Yes. So if you can
Okay.
be there to like shine your iPhone flashlight at the right angle for me, that'd be really helpful.
I
We can
got
do
you.
we can take it on together. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I love this. I'm here for this. We
Just
got
look
it.
out for the champagne bottles coming at you, maybe from every direction. The broken
Yes.
champagne bottles. Yeah.
Yes. I will need some plot armor.
You,
Definitely.
yes. Oh, it's so good. Um, while we're talking about the cinematography and the editing, man, the way that Dev Patel and this team has interwoven flashbacks throughout, I just thought was so artistically done, and it created so much intrigue and kind of the way that certain visuals continue to show up again and again, and that it is partially like just it's Dev Patel's characters' memories and those images that are seared into your brain, which is so much like the way memory works where you just can't get that moment or that visual out of your mind. But then also because we keep going back again and again to those visuals, I'm also like, what does this mean? Where was this from? What does this represent? What's the context? Like, it created so many great curiosities and questions in me that was very forward propelling to keep wanting to know more. And so the way that we get a little bit more every time, a little bit more throughout, was really just like the little crumbs I needed to keep curious and to stay engaged with, like, what has this character gone through, and we're waiting for the movie to show us. But sometimes flashbacks can be really cheesy when they're edited, and they're kind of like, okay, and this is the flashback and this is the memory. But I feel like there was so much like pacing and the editing of the way those flashbacks are kind of like almost too quick and so fleeting that you want to linger a little bit longer there. But also even just like the way that we don't see a full scene, we just see these random little visuals that are cut together really quickly and then they're gone in a moment. I just thought that they handled that really well, and it could have easily felt very gimmicky and cheesy, but instead it created so much intrigue, and I think it was very artistically done. So I love that the way those shots are framed and then the way that they are cut together. I just love the way that those were done throughout this movie.
Yes, this is how you do flashbacks. And hey, I can get on a soapbox about flashbacks because when they're done poorly, it's just lazy writing and it makes me angry. But this is how you do flashbacks because, like you said, it's these fleeting glimpses into his past, and we're seeing that these are memories, and he's kind of consumed by them, and it's tied to his grief. And then over the course of the film, we get to see more and more of those. And we get to see maybe some longer shots too that give us context about what we're seeing. And the way that they're interspersed in between the action really helps you stay engaged, keeps you interested. Because early in the film, we see the cop standing in front of, a house on fire. And so it's like, oh my gosh, what was that? But we don't get to learn what actually happened there until much later in the film. So it's this laying of seeds, and then later we're able to, reap the harvest from that. It's this setup and payoff that this film is doing with those flashbacks. And all the flashbacks are directly tied to what our protagonist is going through and what he's having to process through and what is motivating him to go on this adventure. So I think this is a great use of flashbacks. It does not fall into any of the ruts that I feel like flashbacks often fall into, and just helps keep the momentum of the film going, and helps you understand the emotional and kind of like moral sense of justice that our protagonist is going about all of this action with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. And I think what's also really great about those little visuals that we get throughout is that sometimes we think that we understood what a visual represented for him, but I love kind of the way that the film further draws us into and helps us understand what they were. So the one that really stood out to me was the shot of the match. Like initially we kept seeing that again and again, and I always associated and linked it to like him watching them burn his village, and that is that, honestly, that in itself is really meaningful and probably really traumatic and really difficult. But that's what I tied those two things between those shots, because we see him as a little boy watching his home and his village and his community get burned. So okay, that's the link. But no, the film later shows us that there is more associated to that shot with him him having to watch his mother's body get burned by that match. And so I love the way that the film makes us think that we understood and then shows us more. And I think that like surprise and shock and gap in expectations that's created also helps us like we are just wowed by it, and we are then even more leaning in to engage and question and wonder more, because what we thought to be true actually even had more meaning than we'd initially assumed. And I thought that was really smart, because I think sometimes the flashbacks can be really on the nose, where you're like, ah yes, I get it, I understand now. But no, there's a very artful sense of expectation creation, and then the way that the movie almost thwarts it in a really meaningful way to really deliver that really emotional scene. I thought that was really smart for the film to do as well.
And I think the other thing that helps to heighten the emotion of those flashbacks is the contrast between the flashback and the present day. Because when we flash back and he's with his mom, obviously before things go very, very bad, it's so peaceful and serene and joyful, and they're in the forest and there's this lush greenery, and like you want to be there with him and with his mom, and it's just this idyllic moment, and shows how good life was. And then you're like transported back into the present when
Right.
things are so bad, and things are dark, and he's in the city, and you see the wealth disparity, and you see all of these things, and there's this harshness about the present. And I think that helps us understand our protagonist's mental state as well, because I mean his mom was brutally raped
Mhm.
and murdered, and his whole village was destroyed when he was a kid. Like,
Yeah.
that is going to affect you and harden you. So it also just helps us understand his child uh likeness when he was a kid and the joy that he felt, and then how that was all just violently ripped from him by this
Mhm.
corrupt man. uh and
Mhm.
so that contrast, I think, really really helps ground everything that he's doing.
Yeah, no, that's so true. And the other thing that I love about the flashbacks is that they come unannounced, and they will show up, and we start, cutting back to those moments in moments when we kind of least expect it to. Like there's some shots where he's doing the dishes at his job, and he catches a glimpse of Sita being taken advantage of, and it triggers that flashback again, and that moment of trauma for him. And I feel like that is so accurate in the way that there are these things that just trigger that you could be just going about your day, and all of a sudden you're brought back to those moments that were hard for you. And I think that the movie did such a great job of helping us feel the jarring nature of when those things come, or we're like, oh no, there's something about this moment right now that is triggering that all over again. Or it's like when he sees Rana for the first time, immediately cuts to he's a child again, and he's back in that moment again. And I love the way that those flashbacks come really unannounced, and we are able to empathize with him as a character, with how shocking and surprising those flashbacks are too. It's almost like we get to live that with him, which is really smart, because sometimes movies do the like slow fade to a flashback and we kind of can see it coming. But I love that these are like quick cuts back, and then we're, back in the present again. But clearly there was a trigger.
Yeah, yeah. What a great way to show grief and trauma, and the way that that affects you and continues to live with you even, many years after the event happened. And I think this whole movie is so good at getting us into the protagonist's head, through, flashbacks like that, but also in these fights when he is jarred and when he's like actually hurt or knocked out. The whole movie just becomes disorienting, and you hear, the ringing of the noise, and the screen kind of goes blurry. And so that is once again just helping us to further empathize with this protagonist and see the world as he is seeing it, even if we've never, been a fighter, we're not moonlighting as, a brawler. We can still feel that empathy of like, oh my gosh, this is so disorienting, and then he has to get up and go fight again. And then those flashbacks reinforce why he's continuing to do this. So again, it just all ties together and reinforces each other in a really really strategic way.
Yeah, that's so good. And the editing, the cinematography in those scenes when he's getting knocked down too, I feel like we're so immersive and visceral. Like I think that's one thing that I was feeling throughout this movie, is that it's such a movie that is meant to be felt. Those it through the visuals and the soundtrack and the sounds and everything, you feel like you are experiencing so many of those things. And I feel like in movies we've seen a million times people fighting in a ring, but there's something that's just like visceral and raw about the way that it was showcased in this movie that I thought was really special, and something fresh and new, and just immersive in a way that, from the very first scene where we meet him, you feel the blood dripping and the concussion coming. Like you can feel it. And this movie does such a good job like illustrating the visceral, like raw emotions of some of those scenes that we've kind of seen a ton of times in movies before, but this one's bringing something fresh and new and different to it.
It knows when to do that and when to not. Like I feel like some movies get like really heavy-handed with things like that, but Monkey Man is very well paced and kind of measured in how it makes you immersed in the action, and it doesn't just use one device, but it uses multiple ways to get you feeling immersed in the action, and like you're right there with the protagonist. So that variation, and I think that understanding of filmmaking components is really on display here, understanding what needs to come at what time, and what, shot or what sound we need to use to get the audience feeling that. And man, just the technical proficiency in this film is very impressive.
Mm.
And it's Dev Patel's directorial debut. Like, obviously,
Once
he
again,
didn't do the
yes.
whole movie. There is a large team working with him. But for him to be at the helm and making all of these
Yeah.
decisions and influencing what is being done, it just shows a level of mastery that I feel like you don't often get in a directorial debut.
Yeah, yeah. And I feel like we've seen him as an actor in film, but it's really exciting to see his ideas. Like I feel like I've gotten to know and understand just how his brain works a little bit more, what he's passionate about, what he wants to advocate for, the issues and themes that are important to him. Like I just think it's neat to see how much he has invested and poured into this film and what he's chosen to highlight and bring to life. I think all of that is really neat to see kind of just his voice as an artist beyond what he brings to roles that are written that he is bringing to life and characters that he's bringing to life. Like, no, when he wants to write this story, what has he chosen to write about? I think that in and of itself is really exciting. And he's someone now that is going to be so fun to follow, to see what does he create next, what story captivates him next that he wants to bring to life as a director now, and a screenwriter now, and an actor now. Like all of those things coming together. I think that's going to be really fun to follow his career and see what aspects of this craft and this art that he wants to dedicate his time and attention to. It's gonna be really fun.
Oh, I can't wait.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
excited.
Right? This is the thrill of like
Mm-hmm.
original filmmaking. You know, that's like one
Yeah.
of the things that I was thinking about leaving the theater, of just how much when we have these artists that have such clear visionary ideas, and when they are given the time and space to create, man, this is what we get, you know? So I'm like, great, let's usher in more of this age of original filmmaking. Is it, as it arrived, are we here? You know, like I think it's something that we felt over the summer with Barbie, you know, and seeing how much the masses really embraced an original film with new ideas, fresh ideas that it's bringing to life. And this is not new to filmmaking, but I think it is neat to see if we will get more of it now as we transition between phases of where we're choosing to spend our time and money as we fund movies. Yeah. So, like you mentioned earlier, seeing this in the theater is partially getting just to support from the like pure like money and box office
Mm-hmm.
perspective, getting to
Yeah.
support this type of filmmaking. Yeah.
We love it.
We
We want
do.
more.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, yes, yes. And it's going to be cool to see like as like this fire directorial debut, how studios and production companies maybe are able to see kind of this is his first thing on his resume. They can see what he's capable of, and perhaps the reception from audiences, and then be like, yeah, let's do it. Let's work with this dude. He clearly can do it. And the way that he's now gotten more opportunity to showcase what he's capable of, like, man, what will open up next for him? You know, it's cool to think about too.
Well, and hopefully this is another example of the fact that we can have good action
Yeah.
and a quality story. Like, we we bring
Right.
this up, I feel like, every time we review an action film, but we want both, and it's possible to do. And
Mm-hmm.
having a strong emotional core for a film and things to say, what a novel idea,
Right.
don't detract from the action. You can have both, and having both makes for a much better film. So I'm really hoping that other studios will take note. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with like a silly popcorn movie, you know,
Mm,
action movie. There's nothing wrong with the Fast and Furious franchise. It's great fun. But we don't want just that. We also
yeah,
want weight and meat and
yeah,
thoughtful stories with great
yeah.
action. We want both, and we
Hmm.
will pay good money to see both on the big screen.
Yes, it's so true. It's so true. And this is something that we've talked about in the past too, but from a reach perspective, I've thought also a lot about how this being an action film perhaps just gets butts and seats, like through this genre that people love, that they get excited by. He's able to usher in these ideas through this platform, through this entertaining aspect of movie going, versus this being like a purely a drama that focuses on the themes alone, maybe less of an audience draw, but he's able to get people to go out, have a really great time at the movies, and grapple with and chew on these big ideas as well. And it's neat to see other movies that do something similar. Like we talked about this a little bit with Coda, the way that it uses like the coming of age genre and the structure and the framework, but yet it's ushering on all these new ideas as well for the audiences to engage with. And it's cool to see the way that Monkey Man does the same thing too. This tried and true, beloved genre that people are willing to pay money to go see at theaters, and have a good time with is also coupled with these really big ideas that we get to experience as well. And honestly, if you don't want to engage with those, that's okay too. You're gonna have a great time with all of the other parts that this movie serves up for you. So just that there's plenty for people to have in this movie is really really cool, and I think helps draw people to just go out and see and experience this, when they get to see the trailer and get excited about it and go. Just the reach that this movie has by being structured in this way is really smart and strategic. Honestly, it's very strategic.
Yeah, I'm hoping that this does really well at the box office because I
Yeah,
I
same.
genuinely don't think that it's like people aren't willing to go to the theater. Sure, that's some of it, but I think more than anything, it's we're sick kind of, or maybe we're just sick of completely the franchise model. You know, like
Yeah,
we've had so many superhero movies, we've had so many franchise action movies, and to have something that feels unique and creative and new, people will go out to the theaters for, is what I'm assuming and what I hope the box office will bear
reflect.
out. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm really hoping that people will go out and see this, and then maybe, I don't know, maybe studios will finally learn a lesson instead of learning the wrong lessons about things. Maybe they'll learn a lesson of like, hey, fund movies like this, fund, you know,
Mm.
creators with a strong vision and something to say. You know, we don't need to make everything into a franchise, but if you give us something that is meaty and is quality, then we are going to reward you with the monies. It's simple, but yet the studios seem to
Capitalism,
not
man.
understand that.
Let's use the capitalist forces for good.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
give
Yeah.
our money to the things we want to support. Yes.
Because we're stuck with them. We're stuck with the studios. So why don't
Mm-hmm.
we try and like train them in what we actually want?
Yeah.
It might be too ambitious of a goal, but you know, we can try.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's so good. That's so true. I mean, the that is, a huge factor for what things get to the big screen. So it's also just neat too that Dev Patel, it's like personally funded a lot of this movie and helped produce it, and Jordan Peele as well. Like they the dedication they have to this story too is like really fascinating to see, and really meaningful as well. Like they felt their support is really crystallized in their allocation of like literal funds towards this. So that's like really neat to see as well. Okay, any other last thoughts about Monkey Man before we wrap up? Time has flown.
Jen, I have so many more thoughts, and we've already talked for an
I know.
hour. This is insane. Oh, this
Yeah,
movie is so good.
it's crazy.
Um, okay, uh, I have two very quick, silly things.
Okay.
Um, Number one, I love a fight in a commercial kitchen. It's the perfect location for a fight because you have so many different weapons available to you. And then, of course, it sounds so interesting because like a pan will sound different than this like water pitcher will sound different than a dude's head going into a microwave door. Like there is so much just creativity when you have a
Yeah.
fight in a commercial kitchen. So I would just like to advocate for more quality fights in commercial kitchens in action movies. I think it's a great time.
It's so fun. I love that little scene, that little moment. It's not even a scene. It's just like a little shot where the camera's kind of at an angle with these like three knives on the table and he passes by, he
Yes.
pauses for a second. He looks at the cleaver. He's like, "Nah, too big. I can't carry that ish," and goes for the two smaller ones. I love that we get to see this little moment of like logistical details when you are a fighter. Like you're like, I can't move around in a cleaver tucked inside of my suit pocket, shirt pocket, whatever, wherever he tucked that thing in. Just the logistics is kind of fun. So I love that. We don't even see his face. He just pauses, picks it up, tosses it to the side, and picks up the other two. I love this. Just little things are so fun.
Because you can see his thought process too, and like
Yeah,
we see the knives, I think before he processes it, and so we're like, oh my gosh, grab the knife, and then we watch him come back, and then he does, and then we see his thought process going. It's again just it's those little details that make that
yeah.
so fun and exciting because we are invested in the fight and we are invested in this protagonist.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It was so great. It was so great. What's your second fun thing?
Uh, did you see any pinky rings in this
I
movie?
did. I saw one. I'm sure
Ooh.
there's a lot more. I'm sure there's a lot more in a movie like this. But the one that I saw was Rana. There's a close-up shot.
Mhm.
See, I'm really good at picking up when it's a literal close-up shot. He had on, I think, a ring on every finger, and one of them obviously was his pinky finger. I forget which scene, but there's a close up shot and his hand is right in front of his mouth. And there's just rings galore because we must assert our power and dominance and wealth with all of our jewelry to support the thesis.
I mean, also though, like if you're gonna be regularly in fights, it would make sense to have
True.
some chunky rings and to
Yeah,
have them on
very
most
true.
of your fingers. Like
Yes.
that is a weapon in and of itself. So I kind of respect it.
How many more were there that you have jotted down on your list for data points?
Okay, so I confirmed one other and then I think there was one more other than that, but like I
Mm,
wasn't able to like confirm it.
right.
And so it further I think reinforces our thesis of
Mm.
when a when a man is wearing a pinky ring, he's usually a corrupt individual who is like seeking power and status, and like the pinky ring is a symbol of that. The other person who had a pinky ring on was that keeper of the temple, that trans person had a
Oh.
pinky ring on, and I think that is really interesting. um and then the other person who I wasn't able to like fully confirm was the kid's mom. I think she wore one, but I'm not sure.
Oh.
Um, which I think further reinforces that like when a
The
woman wears a
male.
pinky ring, it doesn't necessarily signify anything, but it
Yeah.
could just be decorative. So we have
Yeah.
some interesting choices in this movie for
Ye
sure.
yes, indeed. But yeah, that the specifically male corrupt power
Yes.
is, yes,
Yeah.
the thing that we are circling around, and the
Yeah.
data is continuing to show us.
And his pinky
No
ring
doubt
was chunky. Like I feel like all of
about
his rings were
it.
like I'm gonna hit you and it's gonna hurt type of rings.
Yeah. But I'm also like, I mean, that's a smart choice. Good job, Rana.
Yeah.
Like, I guess
Yeah.
you have a goal in mind. He also just he oozes off of his whole energy that he shows up with, just the desire to like prove his power, you know? So that
Yeah.
also further confirms the data point. It's just
Yeah.
dripping off of him. Yeah. All right. Well, we could talk for many more hours about Monkey Man, but alas, we will wrap it up here. We can't rave about this movie enough. Yeah, this is a review and discussion of Monkey Man, and you can find it available out in theaters. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Movies and Us. Our name sums it up. We're all about movies and the powerful ways we can connect with each other and the world around us. This podcast is about all of us and our shared stories, so everyone is welcome here, and we're so glad you spent time with us today. You can subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you tune to your favorite shows. Drop us a rating and review letting us know your thoughts about Monkey Man. You can connect with us on Instagram, Threads, and TikTok at moviesanduspod, or email us at moviesanduspod@gmail.com. We will be back next week to discuss the new film Civil War. We hope you have an amazing week, and we'll talk again very soon.